I think a nice way to transition to some of your more academic research is actually a popular piece that you wrote for the New York Times. And the title really resonated with me. And it's, if you're reading Stoicism for life hacks, you're missing the point. And I mean, you have a chapter on Stoicism and life hacks in your new book, Stoic Wisdom, as well. And my first exposure to Stoicism was actually through this sort of cottage industry of books and podcasts, etc., in which you're really just sort of given, I don't know, quotes and unsubstantiated advice. And consequently, I mean, that's what I thought Stoicism really was. It was just sort of an empty doctrine of, I think the phrase you used was suck it up and chug on. But it wasn't until I studied with Katja Vogt at Columbia, who was actually very excited to hear that I was talking to you because she's so interested in Stoicism. But that's when I realized that the Stoic tradition has this tremendously rich history. I mean, that it wasn't just Marcus Aurelius, but there was a philosophy of physics, philosophy of mind, logic, all sorts of things. And maybe talking about your piece would give us some context. What are the life hacks that you have in mind, and what is the point of reading Stoicism?
So, a lot of people, as you say, do turn to Stoicism for secular religion, you might say, and secular religion with these very pithy quotes, especially from someone like Epictetus, but also to some degree Marcus Aurelius, although I think he's much more obscure, harder to read, and rambling, to be sure. But
That's
Stoicism,
partially because his texts were a diary, right?
they're to myself, to oneself,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
And
yeah.
they're written on a battlefield at night. I think he had difficulty sleeping. He probably took stuff, we
Yeah.
think, and
We can forgive him for rambling then.
that's true. It's not argumentative. It's gratitude here to these people and to those people, and a sense of um, um, a sense of humility, but also he, like most in that period, would have had tutors who were trained in Stoicism. So it was the street philosophy of the time, and it was highly accessible. And so he would have had familiarity with it. What about it as a life hack? Well, some of it is, unlike reading Aristotle, my true love in many ways, the Stoics have exercises. Seneca talks a lot, who I think is wonderful, talks a lot about pre-rehearsal of evil. So we have these external goods that Aristotle talked about that are part of your flourishing life, but they make you vulnerable to luck. They make you vulnerable to losing what you love, so to love and loss. They're sticky attachments. And so it's sort of useful, the Stoics say, not to think of them as constitutive parts of your happiness, flourishing, or eudaimonia, but really as indifference with a TS, ta adiaphora. And by that, the things that are indifferent. And by that, they mean not that you're indifferent to them, but that you have to learn new approach and avoidance behaviors so that you don't get stuck on them. So they're not acquisitive and sticky attachments or very painful ways of avoiding stuff. And so they have these exercises. You might call them hacks. Life hacks, ways in which you can try to diminish their role in your life. It's not that you give up having friends or having children or loved ones or death. How could you give that up? There's some people in Silicon Valley where you're living do think you should
Yeah.
practice giving up death and trying to be immortal in some way. But they think, okay, your mortality is something you might be afraid of, a bad. Well, anticipate it. How are you going to approach it? That sort of thing. Or you might anticipate in the pandemic, that you might get quite sick. How do you adjust to some of these things? So they have these, this idea that you shouldn't be blindsided. You should think a little bit. Cicero, rehearsing some of these views, says, anticipate the future, dwell in the future. And so that's quite reasonable advice. And I think that's something that people who are seeking self-help think is reasonable. Epictetus is kind of funny in this regard. He says, essentially, start small and then get big. Small, you might break a vase in your house. You should sort of think a little bit about it in advance, and also cool your jet, if it happens. And then he also says, well, you might go to the pool, and there may be a lot of people that are pickpockets in the public baths, and noisy and gossipy. Something I think about a little bit when I go choose a time to swim. Is it going to be noisy? Will I have the lane, enough of a lane to be able to do the backstroke outside? That's that kind of thing. He's a sort of plan, anticipate. And so that if you do have unwelcome or undesired consequences or outcomes, it doesn't upset you that much. So that's one idea, pre-rehearsing of the bads. And people make a lot of that as a modern day life hack, you might say. Another one is to attach to your intentions mental reservation. Says Seneca, I'll go sailing. I'll go out on a boat unless it rains. Okay, so if it doesn't rain, the beginning actually of Virginia Woolf, To the Lighthouse. Yes, James, we can go to the lighthouse if it doesn't rain. It becomes a mantra in that novel, in part because there's a little boy who really wants to go. But his mother, who I think is Virginia Woolf's mother, Mrs. Ramsay, is trying to calm his expectations so he won't be overly disappointed. So those are some of the practical things that people get excited about, and some, they call life hacks. I can't say that you would really find that kind of pragmatic set of exercises in Aristotle. He's much more interested in telling you what are the constituents of a flourishing life. But it's often called self-help, but self-help is a misnomer, a modern misnomer, insofar as the Stoics were really keen on community. They were the first cosmopolitans. They were not quite the first, the Cynics were, but Zeno wrote a Republic about the cosmos and our citizenship in the cosmos.
Is this Zeno of Kydia?
Yeah.
Okay. There are a lot of Zenos. So
there sure are. There's a Zeno who didn't do so well in a race, or was thinking about races with a tortoise and a hare. Right? Exactly.
Now,
so anyway, that's part of the appeal. But also, if you're thinking about it as self-help, you should listen to Marcus Aurelius and Zeno, who said, Marcus says it this way: if you've ever seen a body with a trunk separated from hands, legs, and arms, that's what we make of ourselves when we cut ourselves off from each other. And so
that's really nice.
That you really have to belong and have a sense of being at home in the world, a catchphrase for the Stoics, in which you are attached to others or affiliated. They're not turning their back on affiliation.
Now, is this sense of belonging and community then what you're referencing in the title of that Times piece when you write, if you're reading Stoicism for life hacks, you're missing the point?
Yeah, that's in part of it. I really emphasize in my book, Stoic Wisdom, right there, that that people have failed to see how critical and substantive the social aspect of Stoicism is, in the sense of building a flourishing life through a sense of belonging. And it comes out over and over again. Seneca's writing these letters at the end of his life in an epistolary relationship, probably literary and not actual. But that said, he's always thinking about how he's mentoring someone else, and he can't wait to receive the letters. And if you think of Rubens' very famous painting of Seneca dying, he's surrounded by friends. It's a kind of Phaedo scene, Plato in of Socrates dying with his friends around him. He's not doing it alone. He needs help of friends to make sure they get the veins and can help him cut his veins or die in the right way.